All right, so get this. Today we're diving into something uh, pretty different. It's just one person talking for a long time, kind of like their own personal take on everything that's going on.
Yeah, it's like a snapshot of how one person sees the world right now, all their thoughts about current events and trends, and how they connect them all together.
And let me tell you, they make some pretty wild connections. We're talking technology culture, even some theories about the pandemic, and, well, let's just say the people in charge.
It's interesting because this person seems to see control everywhere.
Yeah.
Like that's the main thing they see in the world, this idea that things aren't what they seem.
Okay, so let's break it down. They start off by saying that technology, the stuff we use every day, that it's become a tool for control. They actually tell this crazy story about how the early internet was basically built on, well, let's just say adult content.
Yeah, and it's like they're making a point about how people got hooked and then the internet just became a part of everyday life,
Yeah.
something we can't live without. They compare it to a fishing net slowly tightening around us.
And it doesn't stop there. They see the same kind of control happening in culture, too. Specifically, they talk about how individuality is being eroded. Like everyone's being pushed to be the same.
Yeah, and one example they give is the rise of the transatlantic accent, that
Mhm.
blend of British and American pronunciation. You hear it more and more, and they see it as like a subtle sign that cultures are becoming less distinct.
And they even bring up music, saying that modern music lacks the depth and complexity of older music. It's like they think there's a link between losing unique cultures and a decline in creativity, imagination, maybe even critical thinking. Makes you think, what are we losing when everything starts to sound and look the same, right?
It really does make you wonder, are we becoming more passive, just consuming whatever's given to us, or are we still actively shaping our own culture?
Mhm.
Think about your own life, the music you listen to, the shows you watch. Are they expanding your world, or are they keeping you in a bubble?
Okay, so now things take a bit of a turn because this person is a big believer in the deep state. This idea that there's a group of powerful people secretly controlling everything. They even quote a famous saying, the people who really rule the system are vastly different from the ones the public see and hear about.
Right. And believing in a deep state often comes from a distrust of authority and official narratives. It's a way of trying to understand complex events, even if the evidence is maybe a little thin.
And according to this person, one of the tools this deep state is using is the COVID-19 pandemic. They see lockdowns, economic upheaval, even vaccines as a way to grab more power.
Yeah, this is where things get a little controversial because they basically see the whole pandemic response as a deliberate strategy for control. They point to things like lockdowns, rationing, and the possible dangers of vaccines as evidence.
They even see a connection between the pandemic and the rise of bioethics as a field, arguing that it's all about normalizing the idea of choosing who lives and who dies, especially when it comes to older people.
It's a sensitive topic for sure. And while they raise some valid concerns about ethical dilemmas in healthcare, with limited resources and tough medical choices, they frame it within this bigger picture of distrust and malicious intent.
And they drive that point home with a really stark question. If they really care about the elderly, why are they letting them freeze to death in their homes every winter? It's a harsh comparison, but it does highlight the complexities of social support systems and the difficult choices that have to be made sometimes.
Yeah, it makes you think about how we value different lives and how those values translate into policies. It's definitely something worth reflecting on, even if you don't agree with everything they say.
But hold on, because there's more. This person also believes that we're constantly being fed propaganda, especially through movies and TV shows.
Yeah, the idea that entertainment can be used to shape public opinion has been around for a while. Think about war propaganda films or even subliminal messaging in ads. But this person takes it even further.
They quote a media expert who said, all medical movies and dramas and all police movies and dramas are propaganda. And they even tell a story about an old war movie with Gregory Peck that subtly introduced the concept of total war to the audience.
That's a good example of how even entertainment can carry messages and shape our understanding of things. It makes you wonder, are we aware of the messages we're absorbing when we watch movies and shows? Are we just passively taking it in, or are we thinking critically about it?
And to wrap it up, they point to a new TV show that's coming out about how Boris Johnson handled the pandemic. They see it as a clear attempt to create a heroic story around something they believe was a manufactured crisis.
That really shows their deep skepticism of official narratives and their belief that the people in power are manipulating information to stay in control. It's an extreme view, but it makes you think about where we get our information from and the biases those sources might have.
And there's so much more to unpack from this person's monologue. Believe me, it gets even more interesting.
Yeah, this is just the beginning. We've
Yeah.
only scratched the surface of their worldview.
Stay tuned because we're just getting started on this deep dive into one person's very unique perspective.
This speaker, they also had something to say about the lockdowns. They saw something interesting happening.
Oh, really? What was it?
Well, they noticed a lot more train traffic during the lockdowns, even when nobody was really traveling.
Wait, more trains? What do they think that means?
They think it means that people in power were stockpiling stuff. Like they're getting ready for some kind of collapse or a shift to a more controlled world. Like they're looking for clues in everyday things.
That's pretty out there. But I guess it fits with their whole idea about control being everywhere.
Exactly. And that brings them to another big worry, internet censorship.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one these days.
They think the internet, it used to be all about free speech, but now it's being controlled more and more to silence anyone who disagrees.
Yeah, it makes you think about all those algorithms that decide what we see online. It's like, are we really choosing what we see, or is someone else choosing for us?
That's their point.
Yeah.
Exactly. They even compare it to China, with their social credit system where people get scored based on their behavior. That's kind of scary to think about that happening here.
Oh, yeah, that would be awful. Imagine getting penalized for liking the wrong post or saying something unpopular online.
And they connect this to the idea of rationing in the future, like a world where everything's scarce and they divide people into essential and non-essential.
Like some kind of dystopian movie.
Exactly. They think it's a way to control people, take away their freedom, and tell them what they're worth.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit.
Yeah.
This speaker also spends a lot of time on vaccines, and, well, their views are a little different, let's say.
Yeah, a little different. They're really skeptical about vaccines, especially the COVID ones.
Like they don't trust them at all?
Yeah, they talk about the reports of bad reactions and deaths, and they question why everyone's being pushed to get vaccinated.
They even compare it to eugenics, which is a pretty strong comparison to make.
Right? It seems like their distrust goes beyond just the government. It's like they don't trust the whole medical system either.
It's important to remember, though, that lots of people are hesitant about vaccines for different reasons. Misinformation, fear, personal experiences. So it's complex.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
And while their claims about vaccines might not be scientifically proven, they do reflect a real concern that some people have about medical interventions in general.
They even share a story about a woman in Canada who chose assisted dying because she couldn't handle being isolated during lockdown. They see it as proof that the government doesn't value life anymore.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
It's a sad story, and it makes you think about end-of-life choices and how isolation can affect mental health.
Yeah.
But it's just one story.
Mm.
It doesn't necessarily mean the government is intentionally devaluing life.
This speaker, though, they seem to connect everything back to their main ideas. They bring up a book that says some form of slavery is inevitable in human society.
It's like they're building this big narrative using history and different sources to support their arguments. But it's really important to look at their claims carefully and consider if they're biased or not.
And they're worried about corporations, too, like how they have so much power and influence over governments.
Yeah, they talk about the World Wildlife Fund and their market transformation strategy as an example. They think it's less about saving the environment and more about corporations controlling everything.
Like even good intentions can be twisted.
Right. They think this strategy is about giving corporations power over what farmers do and how things are made all over the world. They worry that it'll hurt small businesses and local communities.
It's a perspective that's gaining traction, though, right? The idea that corporations are getting too powerful.
Definitely, there's a growing concern about their impact on society, and this speaker is tapping into that, even if they frame it in a more conspiratorial way.
Then there's the January 6th riot at the Capitol. They have a pretty strong opinion about that, too.
Yeah, they think it was staged a way to make people who disagree with the government look bad and pave the way for more authoritarian rule.
Wow, so they think it was all planned.
They believe the people who participated were manipulated and that the media made it look worse on purpose.
They even compare it to cargo cults from World War II.
Right, like they're saying, we're being tricked into trusting authority figures who don't actually care about us.
And they see all the National Guard at Biden's inauguration as another part of this, like it was meant to scare people into obeying.
It all comes back to their belief that we're being controlled and manipulated on a huge scale.
It's definitely a lot to take in. This speaker's view of the world is complex, and even though some things sound far-fetched, they do raise important questions about power control and how information shapes our reality.
It's been a wild ride so far, and we're not done yet. There's even more to come from the speaker's unique perspective.
The speaker, they really see this deep state everywhere. They even talk about it affecting like medical journals, like The Lancet.
Yeah, they point to an article that criticized Trump and praised Biden. They don't see it as just an opinion piece. They think it's part of this bigger effort to control the narrative, even in science and medicine.
It's like they think everyone's reading from the same script.
Right, and they tie this back to the pandemic, saying it's being used to push us towards a more authoritarian world, where nobody can disagree and everyone has to obey.
And speaking of disagreeing, they're still really focused on vaccines. They talk about reports of deaths after people got vaccinated, especially older people, and they suggest it's all being covered up.
It's important to remember that serious side effects from vaccines are rare, and the scientific community agrees that vaccines are safe and effective. But it's true that some people do have bad reactions, and it's natural to have concerns about medical procedures.
They also mention a Chinese immunologist who is skeptical about the mRNA vaccines, especially for older folks, like they're searching for anyone who supports their view.
It makes sense that people would look for different opinions, especially when it comes to health. But it's so important to be critical of the information you find and to be careful about believing things just because they fit with what you already think.
This speaker is definitely suspicious of authority in general, whether it's the government, corporations, or mainstream science. They bring up Lord Sumption, that British judge who said some controversial things about valuing different lives during the pandemic.
Yeah, his comments were definitely controversial, but they do represent a certain point of view.
Mm.
The idea that some lives are more important than others based on things like age or how much they contribute to society.
Yeah.
It raises some tough ethical questions about how we decide who gets what, especially during a crisis.
It's a slippery slope, for sure. And this speaker sees it as a dangerous shift in our values. Like we're starting to think it's okay to sacrifice certain people for the greater good.
It's definitely something to think about, even if you don't agree with their overall conclusions. How do we balance individual rights with what's best for everyone, especially in a crisis? And who gets to decide what the greater good is anyway?
And then they talk about lockdowns and how they hurt the economy, especially small businesses. They think it was intentional, a way to weaken the middle class and make people rely on the government more.
It's like they see a hidden agenda behind everything.
Yeah, like some kind of master plan where we're all just pawns in their game.
They even point to that grant program in Ontario where they gave money to small businesses that were struggling. They see it as a way to buy people off while they're pushing their own agenda.
So even something that looks like help is actually manipulation in their eyes.
It always comes back to that idea of a manufactured reality, that nothing is what it seems.
Then they talk about those hospital protocols in Ontario,
Mhm.
where they had to decide who to treat first if they were overwhelmed with COVID patients.
Yeah, they see it as proof that the system's deciding who lives and who dies based on some cold calculation. They even mention an article from The Star that talked about these guidelines, which makes them even more suspicious.
And this leads them to make a really strong comparison between what's happening now and genocide.
Wow. Yeah, they point to all the things that happened during genocide, dehumanization, scapegoating, control tactics, and they say we're seeing the same things now. They even tell people to watch a video about the stages of genocide so they can recognize the warning signs.
That's a pretty extreme comparison, but it shows how worried they are about the direction society is heading. Like, they think we're moving towards totalitarianism and using this crisis as an excuse to control people.
It's a perspective that makes you think about the things we value as a society and how important it is to protect our freedoms.
And they're not just worried about governments, they also talk about the World Wildlife Fund again, saying that their market transformation strategy is more about corporate control than saving the environment.
They're worried about big corporations dictating how food is grown and how things are made all over the world. They think it's going to hurt small farmers and local economies.
It's like they see a power struggle behind every good intention.
It's good to be aware of those power dynamics, but it's
Mm.
also important to remember that not everything is a conspiracy.
It's a lot to take in, but it's not all doom and gloom. This speaker also talks about being resilient and how important human connection is, for getting through tough times.
They think even though things are difficult, we still have the power to choose how we respond, and that by being strong, building communities, and finding meaning in something bigger than ourselves, we can still thrive.
It's a message of hope, right? Like, we're
Yeah.
not helpless.
Exactly. And they encourage people to embrace this idea, to connect with each other, build strong communities, fight against injustice, and never give up hope.
It's inspiring in a way.
Definitely.
Yep.
It's a reminder that we can make a difference even when things seem bleak.
So that's it. That's our deep dive into this person's unique and challenging worldview.
It was quite a journey, wasn't it? What did you think? Did any of their ideas resonate with you?
It's important to remember that we're not saying whether they're right or wrong. Our goal is just to explore different perspectives and encourage you to think critically about the world. We hope this deep dive made you curious and inspired you to question things and search for your own truth.
As you go about your day, think about this. What if even just for a second we entertain the idea that the world is being manipulated? What does that mean for us as individuals? Does it make us powerless, or does it give us the power to shape our own destinies?
That's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.